We've all seen them. Greek statues. Huge slabs of muscle, perfect proportions, nearly zero body fat to speak of, and a casual reminder that we're not quite in the shape that we thought we were. An idealistic version of the human form, chiseled from marble, frozen in time, that still somehow judges us centuries later. In modern bodybuilding, the physiques seen in Greek statues are often the end goal, the ultimate Grecian ideal, to look like a Greek god or a Greek statue. But I've often wondered why. What is this obsession with Grecian aesthetics? Why do we still measure ourselves, literally and figuratively, against the standards of men sculpted thousands of years ago? And most importantly, why did they hold themselves to these standards? Why are the statues of Greece so much more jacked than other cultures? Today we'll dive into all of that and more as we discuss the incredibly muscular statues of ancient Greece. To begin, it's important to understand that in ancient Greece, beauty wasn't just admired, it was revered. And it wasn't all about flesh and bone, it was philosophy, art, balance and harmony. They modelled all of this on a concept called Calocathia, a philosophical ideal that fused physical beauty, kalos, with moral virtue, agathos. Basically, looking good wasn't just about vanity, it was about being good. The ideal citizen wasn't just smart or strong, they were both, because a sculpted body reflected a disciplined mind. And their statues, they were ideals. They were what humans could be. Of course, these ideals weren't always grounded in reality. Depicting the perfect male form was as much about showcasing the sculptor's skill as it was about capturing the cultural ideal. In some instances, the men portrayed may have looked nothing like the marble versions of themselves, but these statues weren't meant to be literal representations. They were elevated versions of what a man should be. But while we still admire them as symbols of physical perfection, it's worth remembering. They were never meant to reflect reality, but to inspire it. Fast forward to today, and these same ancient Grecian aesthetics still dominate fitness culture. The sharp jawline, broad shoulders, narrow waist, the infamous Adonis belt. These ideals have embedded themselves deep into Western consciousness, perhaps now more than ever. So when someone says they want to look like a Greek god, they're not just talking about abs. They're talking about a centuries-old vision of balance between body and soul, encapsulated through perfect proportions. And that's what's immediately striking about these statues, that they aren't bloated or exaggerated to max out the human frame. They weren't designed to look as muscular as possible, and that's because the Greeks pursued symmetry, proportion, and control. The ideal was strength without excess, powerful yet unmistakably human. In modern times, there are countless examples of bodybuilders who have pushed their bodies to the absolute limit, surpassing even the most exaggerated examples of Greek statuary. But along the way, something was lost. The balance, the restraint, the pursuit of aesthetic harmony gave way to sheer mass and definition. And for most, that timeless ideal will remain the best example of a truly ideal physique. Not just big, but balanced. The kind of body that doesn't just look strong, but feels purposeful, like every muscle serves a function, every line has intention. And maybe that's why, no matter how much training trends evolve, no matter how many new supplements are released, we keep looking back at these same statues. But a key aspect to consider here is that their bodies were also deeply tied to action. Physical form was heavily rooted in athletics, where Greek men trained not just to compete, but to become living representations of their city's values. And to many ancient Greeks, training wasn't optional. It was a civic obligation, a way to honor your polis, city-state, your family, and the gods themselves. Even Socrates once famously remarked, "It is a disgrace to grow old through sheer carelessness before seeing what manner of man you may become by developing your bodily strength and beauty to their highest limit." Athletic achievement brought fame, honor, and sometimes even immortality, if not in the literal sense, then in marble and myth. And this reverence for physical excellence found its ultimate expression in the Olympic Games. First held in 776 BC, the Games began with a simple foot race, but evolved into a grand festival of athleticism, featuring boxing, wrestling, and chariot races. Victorious athletes were celebrated like heroes, awarded olive wreaths, jars of prized oil, and immortalized in art and story. Competing wasn't just about personal glory, it was about representing your tribe, your city, and proving your worth in the eyes of gods and men. In order to train for these events, the Greeks relied on bodyweight exercises, what we now call calisthenics, to build their strength. The term comes from the Greek kalos, beauty, and sthenos, strength, and that's exactly what these routines aim to achieve. From push-ups to advanced lifts, the Greeks trained for function, mobility, and control. No iron dumbbells, no machines, just gravity and grit, and the belief that a beautiful body should be capable, not just decorative. But strength was only half the equation. A true athlete needed endurance just as much as muscle, and the Greeks gave cardio just as much attention as calisthenics. Long-distance running had strategic value in wartime, particularly in closing the gap between armies before archers could strike. And while the marathon as we know it didn't exist in the ancient Olympics, the Greeks still placed a high value on endurance. Events like the Dolikos, a long-distance foot race that spanned up to 24 laps of the stadium, tested an athlete's stamina, strategy, and mental toughness over several miles. Even women, who were excluded from the Olympic Games, had their own athletic traditions. During the Heraean Games, held in honor of the goddess Hera, young women competed in foot races to celebrate strength, vitality, and divine favor. These events reinforced the idea that physical fitness was not just masculine or militaristic. It was deeply woven into the cultural and even spiritual fabric of ancient Greek life. And what might surprise many is just how advanced the Greeks were in their approach to training. Their routines were structured and deliberate. Physicians like Hippocrates and Galen laid the foundation for what we now recognize as sports science, emphasizing the importance of proper warm-ups, peak exertion, and cool-downs. Even the importance of recovery was noted, as after training, athletes would scrape sweat and oil from their bodies with a strigil, receive massages, and bathe to aid muscle repair. So while their understanding of physiology may not have included modern terminology, their approach was nonetheless empirical, methodical, and surprisingly modern. And their training wasn't just physical, it was also deeply philosophical, and this is reflected in the setting of their workouts. The word gymnasium comes from gymnos, meaning naked, and that's how they trained. In Athens, this was reserved for men, but in Sparta, even women trained in the nude. Nudity wasn't taboo or sexualized. It represented honesty, humility, and freedom of movement. It stripped away ego and social pretense, leaving only the raw truth of one's physical effort. And while not every Greek athlete was a hero, a few transcended into legend. Chief among them was Milo of Croton, a 6-time Olympic champion and one of the most celebrated wrestlers of antiquity. According to myth, Milo began his training career by lifting a newborn calf every day, and as the calf grew heavier, so did Milo's strength, until he was eventually able to carry a full-grown bull on his shoulders. And whether or not this particular story was fact or folklore, the message remains. Start small, increase gradually, and never stop showing up. This principle, now known as progressive overload, remains a foundation of modern strength training. To close, I'd like to point out that while Greek statues were undoubtedly idealized, sculpted to showcase artistic mastery and reflect philosophical ideals, it certainly doesn't mean the physiques they depict were pure fantasy. In fact, they may have been closer to reality than we think. Literary sources like the Platonic dialogues suggest that many upper-class young men in ancient Greece underwent intense and regular physical training, often as a core part of their education. This is backed by archaeological evidence, widespread gymnasia, public bathhouses, and monumental athletic festivals like the Olympic Games, all of which point to a society deeply committed to physical excellence. So while these statues represent an ideal, it's likely that the real physiques were pretty jacked too. And that's it for this video. Until next time, take heed of the words of Plato. Excessive emphasis on physical training produces savagery, while excessive emphasis on intellect produces softness. Harmony between the two produces the finest character.